Home Ministry has released fresh guidelines for lockdown 2.0. Air, rail and road travel remains suspended. However, all health services to remain functional. Operations of fishing industries will be functional. All agricultural activities to remain functional as well. Industries operating in rural areas will be functional. Limited construction activities will be allowed in lockdown 2.0. Face masks mandatory in public places. Transport of goods to be allowed as well. E-commerce will be allowed after the 20th of April. No cinemas, gyms till 3rd of May. All places of worship also closed till the extension of lockdown. Educational institutions to remain shut till the 3rd of May. My colleague Ashish Chaparik joins us live from the newsroom with more inputs on it. Well, Ashish, the Prime Minister yesterday announced lockdown extension till the 3rd of May, and now the Home Ministry also has issued fresh guidelines. Do give us a brief of what's changed. Are there any relaxations, in fact, that we are seeing?
Well, absolutely, Neha. While the Prime Minister did announce the lockdown extension, but how effective, what would be the structure of the lockdown was something that was still unknown. But now the guidelines issued by the Home Ministry has made sure that we have an idea as to what exactly the lockdown would look like till April 20th. Because remember, the Prime Minister said that the lockdown will be stringent till April 20th, after which, depending on the situation, the state governments will be allowed to relax the lockdown in places where COVID-19 pandemic is not as severe as in other places. As of now, the lockdown guidelines are here, and let's just take a quick look at what exactly we have on our hands. First up, healthcare services, as expected, will be fully functional everywhere. And apart from that, supply chain of essential goods will also be functional without any hindrance, because remember, a lot of panic buying and a lot of crowding was happening all across the city, state and the country, given the fact that people were thinking that shops would be shut, especially the ones dealing with essential goods. So these also will be functional as of now. Apart from that, your shops like kirana shops, ration shops, dairy parlors and all of these shops which you visit to buy essential items, essential goods, all of these will be open. But the people, the owners, will have to make sure that social distancing is maintained, and at the same time there need not be any sort of restricted timings, as in you had a lot of places which were opening for particular hours of the day, and that was causing a lot of crowding, that was causing a lot of panic amongst people. Now that also will not have to be done. Social distancing will have to be ensured, and these shops will have to be open as normal. The timings will not have to be restricted. Apart from that, all agricultural and horticultural activities will be fully functional. Now this is a big big relaxation that has come, because clearly a lot of people were urging, a lot of party leaders, you had the Prime Minister discussing about this with the Chief Minister, and also during the all party meet, wherein a lot of leaders, while wanting a strict lockdown, also were demanding that the agricultural sector is something that is the lifeline of the country and needs to be given some sort of relaxation, because you cannot completely halt all agricultural activities, and the Prime Minister clearly has taken that into note, and now agricultural and horticultural activities will be allowed. Apart from that, important offices of the central and the state governments will also be allowed to function, but will have to have restricted staff. Only people, there needs to be some sort of a restriction. Not everybody will be allowed to come in and visit. E-commerce operations, again a big relief to people living in metro cities, because obviously a lot of people still rely on online shopping. People are scared to step out of their homes and are basically relying on e-commerce and e-commerce websites. So all of these operations will also continue. And apart from that, online teaching and distance learning was something that a lot of educational institutions have been following, given the fact that they are not allowed to remain open during this lockdown, and that is something that the government has now encouraged as well. Apart from that, public utilities will also remain functional. Let us now talk about the things that are prohibited, the things that continue to remain prohibited during this lockdown. First up, you'll have, wearing of face cover and masks is compulsory in all public places and workplaces. Now this is a big announcement, because there's a lot of debate going on whether it is required or not, because a lot of people were arguing that we maintain social distancing, we maintain personal hygiene, why do we need to wear a mask, why do we need to cover our faces? But now clearly wearing of masks in public places and workplaces is something that the guidelines have stated as well. And spitting in public places shall be punishable with fine. This is a big guideline issued here. Apart from that, you also have activities prohibited across the country. There will be no travel by air, rail or road. Any sort of travel apart from essential travel, transportation of essential services, all of them will be barred, no matter how serious or what reason you give out to the government or the authorities. So clearly the government has made sure that they do stick to the seriousness of the lockdown that was there in the first part. Now in the second part as well, there is a little bit of relaxation that is given. Let's just talk about a few exceptions that the government has given. Industries operating in rural areas, that is outside the limits of municipal corporations and municipalities, will be allowed to open, given the fact that they only have limited number of people and social distancing is maintained. That is something that the government has made sure that they point out as well. Apart from that, manufacturing and other industrial establishments with access control in special economic zones will be allowed to operate. Now, what is a special economic zone? It is basically a zone, it is basically an area where you have the business and the trade laws are a bit different than the rest of the country, keeping in mind the global competitive market. So all of these industries will be allowed to function, though we're looking at all of these relaxations. These are not complete relaxations. People were talking about the fact that there was some sort of relaxation offered, that should be offered in various industries, various sectors. But clearly the government has decided to stick to the actual nature of the lockdown and make sure that it remains effective while the livelihood of people, that livelihood of daily wages are not affected, because a lot of people were complaining that apart from daily wages, a lot of leaders, a lot of people were complaining that lives of people who are surviving on daily wages is something that is getting affected the most during the lockdown. So clearly the MHA guidelines now clearly state that public activities will be barred, but at the same time some essential activities, apart from the usual ones, will be allowed as well. But clearly they will also have to ensure that there is no spread of pandemic at the same time. So clearly the government has made sure that they do stick to the seriousness of the lockdown that was there in the first part. Now in the second part as well, there is a little bit of relaxation that is given. Let's just talk about a few exceptions that the government has given. Industries operating in rural areas, that is outside the limits of municipal corporations and municipalities, will be allowed to open, given the fact that they only have limited number of people and social distancing is maintained. That is something that the government has made sure that they point out as well. Apart from that, manufacturing and other industrial establishments with access control in special economic zones will be allowed to operate. Now, what is a special economic zone? It is basically a zone, it is basically an area where you have the business and the trade laws are a bit different than the rest of the country, keeping in mind the global competitive market. So all of these industries will be allowed to function, though we're looking at all of these relaxations. These are not complete relaxations. People were talking about the fact that there was some sort of relaxation offered, that should be offered in various industries, various sectors. But clearly the government has decided to stick to the actual nature of the lockdown and make sure that it remains effective while the livelihood of people, that livelihood of daily wages are not affected, because a lot of people were complaining that apart from daily wages, a lot of leaders, a lot of people were complaining that lives of people who are surviving on daily wages is something that is getting affected the most during the lockdown. So clearly the MHA guidelines now clearly state that public activities will be barred, but at the same time some essential activities, apart from the usual ones, will be allowed as well. But clearly they will also have to ensure that there is no spread of pandemic at the same time.
Right, Ashish, if I have to ask you, the MHA has also allowed agriculture and fisheries to continue with the operations. So has there been any mention of a sort of compensation or any kind of compensation for daily wage workers?
Well, you got the packages announced by the central government and the state government as well. Apart from that, these are just guidelines that are now issued talking about the relaxations that have been offered and how exactly the structure of this lockdown would be. This does not talk about any sort of packages or any sort of other relief, financial aid that will be provided to these areas, to these sectors. But one thing that it does point out is that the government is looking at some sort of relaxation, whether you call it a staggered relaxation or you call it anything else. But the government is looking at some sort of relaxation, but at the same time it will also have to be made sure that there is some sort of downfall and decrease in the curve, because the curve as we are looking at it right now is rising every passing day, and the number of new cases are touching 1,000 every 24 hours. So that is something that the government has in mind as well. So a complete relaxation of any additional sector apart from the essential services would actually lead to a chaotic situation, would actually lead to some sort of other sectors demanding the same as well, and that would lead to a chaos that the government does not want at the moment. Essential services is what the government is sticking to, apart from a bit of relaxation to other sectors that employ daily wage workers. But at the same time, these sectors will also have to ensure that they maintain social distancing and they make sure that they do not really aggravate the pandemic and the situation, the crisis situation that the country is at the moment, Neha.
Talking about the relaxations, Ashish, are there any given for any sort of industries in MHA's new guidelines?
Well, we're mainly focusing on the agricultural sector at the moment because that is one sector that everyone was talking about, everyone was demanding a relaxation for, because you also had Prime Minister H. D. Gowda personally, request the Prime Minister to actually look at some sort of relaxation for the agricultural sector, because that was one sector that was suffering a lot and is needed at such a crucial time, because this could possibly be a very long battle, and in such a battle you do not want your lifeline to be halted at such an early stage. So that is something that the government has taken into note. And apart from that, like I've been talking about, industries that will be allowed to operate, these industries will be allowed to operate in rural areas, that is outside the limits of municipalities and municipal corporations. So that is something that the guidelines have made sure that they mention, because you have a lot of industries that actually function in the heart of the city, and a lot of people are employed by these industries. So in case such industries are allowed, you'd have a lot of people coming in from all across different places, because everyone would want to actually attend work and make sure that they go about their livelihood. So that would lead to a chaotic situation. So it is clearly mentioned that industries operating in rural areas will be allowed, and apart from that, manufacturing and other industrial establishments with access control in special economic zones, industrial estates and industrial townships will be allowed. So there are clearly conditions that have been put forward. There is of course some sort of an additional relaxation, like we could call it, but at the same time there is a lot of constraint on that as well, because the government does not want the benefits of the lockdown to be diluted just because a lot of people are demanding relaxation, because health is the priority for the government at the moment. Of course the country would suffer financially, there would be a lot of backlash, and there would be a lot of drawback of all of these constraints, and the fact that a lot of sectors, a lot of money minting sectors are completely halted at the moment. But having said that, the government does realize that health is the priority at the moment, and in case we pass through this phase, because right now, given the fact that the lockdown was so well implemented, we are much ahead, in a much better position than a lot of developed countries were at the same point in time. A lot of the curves that you look at in the other countries, in a lot of developed countries, the curve really steeps very fast, but in India it is still much flatter compared to those countries, and that all boils down to the fact that the lockdown was harsh, the lockdown was strict, and the government ensured that the lockdown is followed without any sort of relaxation, without any sort of avenue for the pandemic to actually go ahead and spread further. So that is something that the Indian government has been applauded for by the World Health Organization as well, and the government has now decided to extend this, and this will be in place strictly till April 20th, after which the state governments will be allowed to assess the situation. And given the fact that the Prime Minister also said that the healthcare workers and the frontline workers will actually have to evaluate and assess which areas are worst affected, and in case some areas are actually out of dangers. So a list will have to be prepared by the state governments, and based on that list, they will actually have to go ahead with some sort of relaxations. And what exactly will be these relaxations, what exactly will the governments do, is something that again depends on the state governments, but then state governments will have to take a call based on the situations in that particular state. We also have reports of the fact that B.S. Yediyurappa has called for a cabinet meeting. So clearly the guidelines are now in place. Even yesterday when he addressed the media post Prime Minister's speech, he said that they will strictly abide by the guidelines of the central government. And now that the guidelines are out, he is discussing all of this with his cabinet ministers, and post that he will come out with a statement for the media. We are expecting him to obviously abide by all of this and make sure that all of these are ensured. But one thing that will remain to be seen is what exactly will CM B.S. Yediyurappa have in store for the sectors that have been given a possible chance of relaxation post April 20th. In case these sectors, in case certain industries, in case certain sectors fall in places where there is no hotspot, there are no COVID-19 cases, how much of a relaxation will these places be given? That is something that again will boil down to what particular state governments will decide. And as of now, CM B.S. Yediyurappa will be discussing on that. But before that, the healthcare workers will have to assess the situation and prepare a proper list of what exactly will have to be done and what exactly is the situation in particular districts, because obviously you have some districts which are clear hotspots of COVID-19, places like Nanjangud, places like Bangalore, Chikbalapur, Kalburgi. All of these places are reporting new cases every passing day, but there are certain other districts as well which haven't really reported any sort of cases, and there are major industries there are major sectors that operate there, and all of these sectors are closed down despite that place not actually being affected very badly by COVID-19 and despite the place being free of the pandemic. So this is the situation that the state governments will particularly have to assess post April 20th, and they will have a free hand to decide how much of a relaxation they would offer. Of course, we're talking about a staggered relaxation. This is not a complete relaxation that we're looking at. There is a chance of relaxation, but again, that will have to be done in stages, a phase-wise relaxation. This is what the chief ministers had also asked the prime minister. On one hand, you had a lot of chief ministers asking for a complete extension of lockdown without any sort of relaxations. On the other hand, you had some you had some other chief ministers who were demanding for relaxation, who were demanding that the lockdown be extended, but at the same time relaxations should be given in a phased manner, or at least in a staggered manner, because a lot of people in the country, a lot of people in a lot of states in India depend on daily wages, and that is a fact that the government of course realizes and is making sure that it focuses on, because you just do not know how long this battle is going to be. So you do not want these people to be left out, and you do not want these people to suffer for too long, because a lot of people, on one hand, you have you ask people to stay at their homes, but what about people who do not really have a home, who do not really have access to food, water? We also went on ground, we also covered a lot of places in a city like Bangalore where people still are deprived of food and water. So what happens to those people if the lockdown keeps getting extended further? So that is something that the government also realizes, and the government is making sure that they give out some sort of they give a space for some sort of relaxation to these sectors, while making sure that the pandemic is kept in check.